Am I the asshole for exposing my brother's true parentage, getting him arrested at his own wedding reception, and causing my parents to get a divorce after 30 years of marriage over a stolen family heirloom? Let me start by saying that I never wanted any of this drama, but when you are pushed to the absolute brink by the people who are supposed to love you, sometimes you have to burn the whole kingdom down just to survive. I am a 27-year-old male, and my older brother, Julian, who is 30, has always been the undisputed golden child of our family. Growing up, Julian could do absolutely no wrong in the eyes of our mother, Eleanor. If Julian crashed the car, it was the road's fault. If Julian failed a class, the teacher was biased. If Julian stole my savings from my piggy bank, our mother would tell me that I must have misplaced it and that I shouldn't accuse my brother of such terrible things.
I learned very early on to keep my head down, work hard, and expect absolutely nothing from my parents. My father, Arthur, was a quiet, hard-working man who built a successful logistics company, but he was always somewhat distant. I realize now that my mother spent decades poisoning his mind against me, subtly hinting that I was difficult, ungrateful, and rebellious, while painting Julian as the perfect, dutiful firstborn son who would carry on the family legacy. The only person in my entire life who truly saw me, respected me, and loved me unconditionally was my grandfather, Charles. Charles was my dad's father, a proud military veteran and a brilliant self-made engineer. He saw right through my mother's manipulative behavior and Julian's lazy, entitled charm. When Julian went off to an expensive university, my dad paid for his entire tuition, his luxury apartment, and his fraternity dues, while I had to work 2 jobs and take out student loans just to get through a local state college.
Julian spent his college years partying and getting into massive amounts of credit card debt, which my mother secretly convinced my dad to bail him out of, claiming it was just normal young adult mistakes. Meanwhile, I spent my weekends visiting grandfather Charles, helping him tend to his garden, grocery shopping for him, and just listening to his incredible stories about the old days. 2 years ago, Grandfather Charles was diagnosed with aggressive pancreatic cancer. It was a devastating blow. During his final 6 months, I practically lived at his house, adjusting his pillows, administering his medication, and holding his hand when the pain became too much to bear. Do you know how many times my mother and Julian visited him during that entire 6 months? Exactly twice. And both times, they didn't even ask how he was feeling. They just subtly dropped questions about whether he had updated his estate planning and what was going to happen to his assets. Grandfather Charles was sharp as a tack until his very last breath, and he noticed exactly what they were doing. When he passed away, the reading of the will was an absolute circus. He left the bulk of his estate and his business shares to my father, Arthur, which was expected. But he left one specific, deeply sentimental, and highly valuable item directly to me. It was his prized possession, a pristine, vintage 1968 Rolex Daytona watch that he had purchased with his very first major engineering bonus. To anyone else, it was a beautiful vintage watch worth over $90,000 on the collector's market. To me, it was a symbol of his hard work, his sacrifice, and the deep bond we shared. The moment the lawyer read that clause, the room erupted. My mother stood up and literally screamed that it was a slap in the face to her firstborn son, arguing that the heirloom belonged to Julian by birthright. Julian slammed his fists on the mahogany table, cursing out my deceased grandfather, calling him a senile old fool who didn't know what he was doing. My dad just sat there quietly, looking incredibly uncomfortable, but he refused to override the legal will because he deeply respected his father's wishes. I took the watch,
kept it in a high-quality biometric safe in my bedroom closet, and swore I would never sell it. Fast forward to
a few months ago, Julian announced his engagement to Clara, a 28-year-old schoolteacher who is genuinely one of the sweetest, most down-to-earth people I have ever met. Clara loved our family and always went out of her way to include me, completely unaware of the toxic dynamics beneath the surface. My mother was ecstatic and immediately began planning a massive, overly lavish wedding that was way beyond what my dad had budgeted for. She insisted that her golden boy deserved a royal celebration. Booking a historic estate ballroom, a 5-tier imported cake, and an international catering staff. What Clara didn't know, and what my dad didn't know, was that Julian had developed a massive, out-of-control gambling addiction over the past 3 years. He had been borrowing money from some very sketchy, dangerous people to cover his losses, and he was drowning in over $50,000 of debt. The loan sharks were beginning to threaten him, promising to show up at his workplace and ruin his life if he didn't pay up before the wedding date. He couldn't ask my dad for the money because my dad had finally put his foot down after the last business venture Julian failed at, warning him that he was cut off from.
I walked into my bedroom, opened my closet, and decided to check on my grandfather's watch, just to look at it, which was a comforting habit of mine when I felt stressed. I pressed my fingerprint against the biometric scanner of the safe. The door clicked open. I reached inside, and my heart dropped straight into my stomach. The velvet box was there, but it was completely empty. The watch was gone. I began to hyperventilate, pulling everything out of my closet, throwing clothes everywhere, screaming in frustration. There was no sign of a forced entry at my front door, and the safe itself hadn't been scratched or damaged. Then a cold realization washed over me. The only other person who had access to my apartment was my father, to whom I had given an emergency key in case I got stuck.
But my dad would never steal from me. My mind immediately went to Julian and my mother. I rushed to my living room computer and logged into the cloud network for my home security system. Months ago, after a maintenance worker entered my apartment without prior notice, I had hidden a tiny, high-definition nanny camera inside a collectible Iron Man helmet sitting on my bedroom bookshelf. It was completely invisible to the naked eye, but it recorded 24/7 with crystal-clear audio. I fast-forwarded the footage to earlier that afternoon, and what I saw absolutely destroyed whatever remaining pieces of love I had for my family. The camera footage showed my mother and Julian walking into my bedroom using my dad's emergency key. He was crying that Marcus, his bookie, was going to break his legs and expose his gambling debts to Clara if he didn't get $45,000 by Friday. My mother was hugging him, rocking him back and forth, telling him to calm down and that she would never let anything happen to her precious boy. Then she literally pointed at my closet and said, "Don't worry, honey. Your brother has that ridiculous $90,000 watch sitting in his closet doing absolutely nothing. He doesn't deserve it anyway, and it should have been yours from the start." Julian objected for a fraction of a second, saying that I would notice it was missing and call the police. But my mother scoffed and said, "Let him call whoever he wants. Your father and I will just tell everyone that..." She then reached into my nightstand, found the old journal where I had foolishly written down the backup manual passcode for the safe when I first bought it, opened the safe, and handed the Rolex Daytona directly to Julian. But the betrayal didn't even stop there. As Julian held the watch, looking relieved, he mumbled, "Dad is going to be so devastated if he ever finds out we did this to Leo." That was the exact moment my mother dropped a nuclear bomb that shattered my entire reality. She laughed, a cold, mocking sound, and said, "Arthur isn't your real father anyway, Julian, so who cares what he thinks? I have spent 30 years making sure that man believes you are his biological flesh and blood, just so you could inherit his family's massive trust fund and logistics company. And I am not letting your brother's stupid watch or some petty debt ruin everything."
I am not letting your brother's stupid watch or some petty debt ruin everything I have worked for. Go sell it, pay off your bookie, and let's get you married to Clara. I sat at my desk for 3 hours in complete, paralyzed silence, watching that video loop over and over again. The man who raised me, the man who worked himself to the bone to provide for us, the man who had been emotionally distant from me because my mother manipulated him into believing I was a bad son, was living a complete lie. He had been cuckolded, deceived, and financially drained for 3 decades by a woman who was actively helping her illegitimate son steal from his actual biological child. A wave of pure, unadulterated, icy rage washed over me. I realized that if I just went to the police right then, my mother would hire a high-priced lawyer using my dad's money.